party symbols or statements. Members of the executive may display the national flag or departmental background when on the visual platform. So members, you are kindly requested to observe that. The secretary will read the fourth order.
Second reading debate, prevention of hate crimes and hate speech bill.
The Honorable Makwanishe.
Thank you very much, House Chairperson. Honorable Ministers and Deputy Ministers, honorable members. It is a responsibility of every one of us to break down the barriers of division and create a society where there will be just human beings worthy of human dignity. I know that most of us are working towards a creation of such a society. Notwithstanding the challenges of the moment, such a society is still possible. But for this possibility to have a chance, we need to deal with a minority in our society who still believe that our core foundational values, which include, amongst others, human dignity, equality, the advancement of human rights and freedom, as well as non-racialism and non-sexism, can coexist with backward and barbaric values of hate and dehumanization of other people because they think they are different from them. We have to socialize our children at a very early age that it is healthier and more easy to live with feelings of love and tolerance than to live with feelings of hatred that burdens the soul. Today, we join other nations of the world in not only condemning hate crimes and hate speech, but we are also attaching consequences to such a behavior. The prevention and combating of hate crimes and hate speech has its origins in the founding provisions of our Constitution, which sets out basic values, including human dignity, equality, and the advancement of human rights and freedom, as well as non-racialism and non-sexism. Our country continues to suffer the legacy of apartheid and colonialism in the form of prejudice and discrimination. It is clear from the frequent incidents of hate in South Africa, including incidents of racism, that the existing laws are inadequate and do not act as a deterrent. PEPUDA, for example, provides victims with a civil remedy that they must pursue in the equality courts. These incidents, motivated by prejudice and discrimination, not only cause harm to the victim and the group with which they are associated, but they are also extremely damaging to social cohesion. As such, there is a need for a clear message that conduct motivated by hate will not be tolerated, and as such, perpetrators will be harshly punished. The bill, therefore, seeks to address the frequently occurring conduct of persons, sometimes violent, who are motivated by clear and defined prejudice. The bill creates the offense of hate crimes and hate speech and puts in place measures to prevent and combat these offenses. Simply put, a hate crime is committed if a person commits an offense, if the underlying offense is motivated by prejudice or intolerance towards the victim based on one or more of the listed characteristics. A conviction in the case of hate crime is to be regarded as an aggravating factor in sentencing. Hate speech occurs when a person intentionally publishes, propagates, advocates, makes available communications, anything that in a manner that is intended to be harmful or incite harm and to promote or propagate violence based on a defined grounds. A conviction of hate speech attracts a fine or imprisonment for a period not exceeding 8 years or both. In our deliberations, we were mindful of the various concerns raised in connection with this bill, especially those expressed regarding the limitation of the right of freedom of expression in the context of establishing a crime of hate speech. Notably, the bill contains a good faith exemption to the offense of hate speech found in the Constitution, but we have also excluded from the ambit of the hate speech any bona fide interpretation and proselytizing or espousing of any religious conviction, tenet, belief, teaching, doctrine, or writings. The exemption falls away if it advocates hatred that constitute incitement to cause harm on any of the protected grounds. Any right that is enjoyed at the expense of other people's rights, its lifespan is limited, because the oppressed never tolerates oppression in whatever kind or form forever. Former President Mandela's words at the Rivonia trial are very instructive when he said, and I quote, "I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if it needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." Close quote. The question is what are we prepared to die for? Or what are we prepared to live for? When violence is meted against other fellow human beings, as this tribunal of the people, are we prepared to take a stand, or do we want to kick the can down the road? The greatest crime that these perpetrators are committing is that they violently teach their victims to wear a mask of self-hate and self-doubt. You must wish to be like them and not be proud of who you are, because being who you are invites violence and dehumanization. It is the type of society that Mandela and millions of South Africans across racial lines. Is it the type of a society that Mandela and millions of South Africans across the racial lines fought for? Is this the type of society the people of the world help us to fight for? We are great supporters of education and persuasion, but there are grave acts that need to be punished. My fellow South Africans, by words and deeds, we must cherish the ideals of a democratic and free society in which all people live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. Nelson Mandela and many South Africans were prepared to die for these ideals. We must be prepared to fight and protect these ideals. We must be our brothers and our sisters' keepers. The ANC support this bill.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member. The Honorable
Honourable members, the DA has a long and established history of being a liberal party that believes in a free and open society with opportunities for all. The DA has always, without exception, stood up for and defended, often alone, the rights of all South Africans to exercise their rights fully. We are a party that believes in the rule of law, and we vigorously support and uphold the Constitution. We have formalized structures within our party to acknowledge and support vulnerable communities, particularly women and the LGBT community. We actively support women's organizations and condemn gender-based violence in all its iterations. The starting point of a debate on this bill must necessarily be the Constitution. Our Constitution already clearly defines the boundaries of personal freedoms and cloaks with illegality any encroachment on those boundaries. The Constitution gives the necessary guidance on how to deal with these matters and has been fleshed out by various judgments of the High Courts and Constitutional Court. These read in conjunction with each other, provide the necessary guidance on how our courts are expected to approach matters of this nature. The most recent of these decisions is the Constitutional Court Kulani judgment. The court gave guidance that limiting a right such as freedom of expression on grounds not already protected within the Constitution, a less restrictive means to achieve the purpose of curbing hate speech must first be considered. This is the position set out by the highest court in this country. And therefore, it's not only necessary to give it serious consideration during the legislative process, it is currently a binding law and we all are bound to follow it. It is good practice when considering legislation to bear in mind that one should legislate for the worst case scenario, not the best, an expensive lesson all have learned in our recent past. Our assessment of this bill is that as government is not even able to provide statistics on incidents of hate speech since the implementation of PAPUDA, it cannot be concluded that other existing measures to deal with incidents of hate speech are not having any positive effect. We hold the view that this bill seeks to do is to double legislate, thereby taking circumstances that would very seriously aggravating circumstances and which would ordinarily be taken into account in argument of sentence on a balance of probability basis and turn them into an element of a standalone crime requiring proof beyond reasonable doubt. The underlying crime already exists. The burden of proof required for these crimes envisaged by this bill would be very onerous, more so than the existing underlying offences, since they will largely depend on proving state of mind. Failure to prove the hate crime will not prevent a conviction in the underlying offence, but will result in the prosecution being hamstrung in arguments in aggravation, since those circumstances already judged unproven will not be admissible as evidence in aggravating sentence. The downside is, in our view, far greater than the possible upsides. The ANC have stated publicly that they have a political agenda with this bill. That should be a grave concern for all responsible citizens. It will almost certainly have a decidedly chilling effect on freedom of speech and expression and will affect more vulnerable people more seriously. In a move reminiscent of apartheid's curtailment of human rights, a move that is oppressively Orwellian and reminds one sharply of Nazi Germany, the Department of Resources and Energy, Mineral Resources and Energy, has this month issued a tender for a media monitoring service to include an early warning system to provide alerts on incoming media launch attacks on the department and monitoring the tone of journalists. If this does not provide forewarning of the direction of this stated political agenda, then nothing will. This legislation opens doors for abuse, for curtailment of personal freedoms, and I, for one, do not trust this government to resist the temptation. The DA will not support this bill.
Honorable Yacob.
Ndiyabulela kakhulu, Chairperson. Chairperson, we debated this bill at length for quite some time as a committee. And firstly, we must outline how complicated and open to manipulation this bill is. Secondly, we must also outline that although we must align with international laws, we cannot forget who we are as a country and how unique our history as South Africa is. This country has a festering wound that refuses to heal because we have not prodded at it in order to heal it. We cannot run away from the fact that we have organizations in this country that refuse to acknowledge the past and what that past has legacied. Organizations which seek to protect the old rule of law and who want to keep us segregated. This bill will never be a panacea for our social problems if we use it to score political points and protect a history the majority does not identify with. And if we refuse to acknowledge the past and its injustices. So in our submission as the EFF, we highlighted how in truth, many people are discriminated against based on their sexual orientation, on their gender, on their skin, and those injustices must be criminalized by any means necessary. We acknowledge that. As a country, we cannot look at the bill in today's or post-apartheid times and at the same time overlook at the remnants of apartheid that it has left with us. We must first decide what is harm according to court standards. And this is where the gray areas are, because if we as lawmakers cannot clearly define what harm is, that leaves it to the courts to decide. And this bill should be succinct in its definition. So as a people who have been previously disadvantaged, we should be free to sound the clarion call to say that all memorabilia, even in the forms of apartheid memorabilia, which is standing right outside this parliament, must be done away with. Some could view this as hate speech. However, given the history of this country, it can never be linear. The fact that race is a contentious issue and is used by those with money, for instance, AfriForum, who seek to gag political speech by calling it racism, who continue to harass our president and commander-in-chief daily, should never be allowed to prosper. It must be understood that by virtue of the dynamics of this country, Black people cannot be calling a spade only to be persecuted by those who ruled for hundreds and hundreds of years in this country under apartheid, racism, and carnage. So the bone of contention should be who should be persecuted for the crime of hate speech and inciting harm. It should be those who wield that power to oppress, those who own the means such as our land, our mines, our economy. Those are the ones who should be prosecuted for the variant crimes against our people. The truth is, it is Black people who work in farms that are exposed to hate speech and hate crime. The truth is, it is the LGBTQ+ community that is subjected to hate crimes and hate speech in this country. It is people with albinism, for instance, who are subjected to hate crimes and hate speech in South Africa. These are but some examples of what hate crime and hate speeches are and what characterizes them. Speaking about the glaring disparities in this country that continue to thrive, even post-apartheid, should never be termed as hate speech. Though we support the bill, which we do, we must in truth highlight that we as economic freedom fighters will not tolerate elements which seek to gag the truth, that the economy of this country is still in white hands, that the history of this country is still told through the white lens, that the history of this country is not spoken through the Black lens, and we must all at times seek to gain our dignity as people, and that being Black people. However, having said that, the ANC is complicit in hate crime because we sit now with load shedding. We sit now with the looted state resources. We sit now being grey-listed, and it certainly wouldn't be marching on the 20th of March. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member. The Honorable Manjose.
Thank you, Honorable House Chair. The French philosopher Voltaire once said, "I may not agree with what you say, but I will defend to the death of your right to say it." I close quote. Freedom of speech is a fundamental tenet of any democracy, and especially ours, and one that should not be limited except in the most serious circumstances. The Hate Crimes Bill admirably seeks to criminalize hate speech and hate crimes in South Africa. While this is a noble goal, we must be extremely mindful of both the pros and cons of the draft bill before the House today. On the one hand, the bill seeks to protect vulnerable groups from discrimination and prejudice. On this, there is no argument or opposition from the IFP. On the other hand, serious concerns do exist that the bill could be weaponized and abused for ulterior motives in instances than those of which it is intended. For example, some worry that the bill could be used to silence political opponents and critics, which would violate their right to freedom of expression. This again cannot be ignored. Freedom of speech is a fundamental right enshrined in our Bill of Rights, while the Constitutional Court in the Xolani judgment recognized that hate speech is not protected speech. It is essential to note that the limitations on the freedom of expression must, and I emphasized, must be narrowly defined and extremely applied. The definition of hate speech in the current bill is currently drafted is, in our opinion, far too broad and vague, which could easily lead to overreach and abuse. We believe, as do many who have filed submissions on the bill, that the definition of hate speech should be more narrowly defined, to prevent such unintended consequences. In the IFP opinion, our existing laws on the balance sufficient enough to deal with and punish hate speech in South Africa. We have the Constitution, the Promotion of Equality and Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act, as well as the common law offense on crime. In conclusion, while we completely support protecting all in South Africa from discrimination, prejudice, and hate speech, we also have a duty to ensure that the fundamental rights and freedom of all South Africans are not eroded in the process. We'll support the bill, but subject to our serious concerns about the broadly defined definition of hate speech. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The Honourable Mulder.
Dankie, agbare voorsitter. Ek het so vir 'n oomblik terug reg oorkant agbare adjunct minister Jeffrey gesit en ons het mekaar in die oë gekyk en ons het vir mekaar geknik en gegroet. Die voormalige leier van die VF+, Dr. Pieter Mulder, het by geleentheid gesê dat dit is net katte en politici wat kan vry en beklei terselfdertyd. Net so 'n ligtelike opmerking. Honourable Chair, on a more serious note, the Freedom Front Plus will take a whole different approach on what we've heard today before me. On the 10th of March, 2023, it was reported on the international media that the former Prime Minister of Pakistan, Imran Khan, was arrested in Lahore by the Quetta police. A day after court in New Southwestern Pakistan issued a non-bailable arrest warrant against the former Prime Minister in case of hate speech and incitement against state institutions. The blanket ban on opposition leaders' speeches is a disturbing demonstration of how government, and in this instance a successive authority, can target critical voices and use the country's regulatory laws to threaten freedom of association and freedom of speech. Honourable Chair, on the 1st of February 2023, during the committee deliberations on the bill, and after I've expressed my concern on the bill, the Honourable Deputy Minister of Justice made the following comments. Mr. Mulder is, I'm sure, concerned about his constituency, which I think is more white Afrikaners because they often these racist incidents, or many of them are propagated by that particular group. The Honourable Deputy Minister later acknowledged that the bill can protect white Afrikaners if they were attacked on the basis of their race. The fact that the Honourable Deputy Minister played an active and significant role during the various sessions of the Portfolio Committee and expressed certain biased views demonstrates exactly why this law should not be. In February this year, a state in India banned prayer for healing, as it leads to conversion to other faiths and thereby spread discord among people and groups. The allegation is close to the definition of social detriment in the hate speech bill before the House today, Chair, and is also the wording of the hate speech charge against evangelist Simeon Chetty in Durban for preaching that Jesus was greater than the Hindu god Krishna. This was then misconstrued superiority for Christians over Hindus as a group. The matter was later settled out of court. The Freedom Front Plus disagrees that there is a rise in incidents of hate speech in South Africa other than what is instigated by certain politicians for political gain. Rather, crime statistics would indicate that these rose and peaked at the time of the 1994 transition and have slowly decreased since then. Ironically, hatred and intolerance towards political groups was in fact a feature of the so-called People's War of the ANC. Any factor that is focused on by a group seems bigger. The grouping believes something more common if they can think of case examples that I've read recently. Chair, our courts are already overutilized and understaffed. Not enough judges, magistrates, poorly trained and equipped investigating officers and prosecutors. If the bill is passed in Parliament today, time will prove it will be ill-fated, impossible to enforce, And just another example of poor legislation and wasteful expenditure. The Freedom Front Plus will oppose the bill. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member. The Honorable Swartz.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, the Constitutional Court held that freedom of expression lies at the heart of a democracy. And the Constitution recognizes that individuals in our society need to be able to hear, form, and express opinions and views on a wide range of matters. Similarly, the court held that the right to religious freedom includes the right to entertain such religious beliefs as the person chooses, the right to declare religious beliefs openly and without fear of hindrance or reprisal. Any legislative measures that limit these freedoms must be approached with great circumspection. And the ACDP believes that the bill before us will have a limiting effect on these freedoms, despite the welcome exemptions and improvements. According to the Kulani Constitutional Court judgment, let's just consider what hate speech is. Hate speech travels beyond mere offensive expression and can be understood as extreme detestation and vilification, which risks provoking discriminatory activities against that group. Thus, expressions that are merely hurtful, especially when understood in everyday parlance, are insufficient to constitute hate speech. Offensive speech is protected by freedom of expression. Now, the ACDP fully appreciates that there are and have been deplorable incidents of hate crimes and hate speech, which must be dealt with the full force of the law. No one, in whatever setting, should be allowed to make statements that advocate hatred and incite violence. And this is a totally acceptable limitation on the freedom of expression. However, our view is that the bill before us today goes too far in the first place, and secondly, that there is sufficient legislation and common law already in place to deal with hate speech and with hate crimes. Chairperson, if one considers as well that the definitions, whilst we have worked on the definitions and tried to contribute to make them narrower, if one considers the definition of harm, it's still very broadly defined as any emotional, psychological, physical, social, or economic harm. What does social harm mean? This is far too widely defined and can be abused. Now, we also are concerned that hate speech laws have been used internationally against Christians. There are numerous cases in which Christian street preachers, laymen, not clergymen, have been persecuted. For example, in the United Kingdom and elsewhere, for alleged hate crimes, and then later acquitted after lengthy appeals. This illustrates not only the need for the current religious exemption clause, but also the need for it to be strengthened as we advocated to protect every believer and not just the clergy. Crucially, most of these cases involved speech that stopped well short of inciting violence. And so for these reasons, the ACDP, whilst we welcome the improvements, is regrettably not able to support this bill. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member. UDM? ATM? Wood?
Yes, Chairperson. Chairperson, South Africa is a country where we often celebrate our diversity through the languages we speak or the cultures we embody. This diversity is, however, a two-sided coin, as many of our individualities can be used as a catalyst for hate. The bill that is before us today sets out one of its core objectives as being combating prejudice and intolerance. Discrimination against those of a different gender, race, nation of origin, members of the LGBTQIA community, or people living with disabilities requires our people to fight for their right to dignity on a daily basis. The proposed victim statement outlined in the bill will be vital in ensuring that those who are targeted have a louder voice than before, as well as making the justice process more efficient. Any economical, psychological, social, or physical damage suffered can be compensated in a more efficient way, which will enable victims to seek to protect their dignity. Chairperson, the effectiveness of this bill will rely on the cabinet members that the President allocates to this cause. But perhaps the most important role of those entrusted in implementing this bill is those of us who must lead by example. In the past 24 hours, we've seen a DA MP blatantly use autism as a basis to mock a young woman who has used her voice to fight climate change. This is evidence of the culture of discrimination that still exists in this country, not hiding in the cracks or crevices, but unrepentant, and even from those who occupy elected office. This is the task that the cabinet member assigned to this bill will need to tackle, and we urge them to engage with these communities and show through action that their voices matter. Good will always be a microphone to bolster the voices of this country, and especially those who others have attempted to discriminate against or to silence. We support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member. The Honorable Sheikh Imam.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Chairperson, I was given a message to apologize on behalf of Honorable Kwankwa. I think we are aware that he's attending IPU and having a network problem with things. Along the National Freedom Party will support this report and the bill before us. I think what we cannot run away from is the fact that there is more hate speech today than we've ever had in South Africa. There is more hate crimes today than we've ever experienced in the past. And there is no doubt about the Chairperson, it's getting progressively worse every single day. In fact, if I had it my way, I will also call for particularly the election in no uncertain terms, tell people on the ground what they want them to hear with all kinds of promises and never go back. So maybe at some stage we should even look at that. Now, we know in this country, many people use hate speech for relevance. Some of them have problems with the LGBTIQ communities. Some of them for relevance with religion. Some of them, of course, for relevance with race. So if you think that apartheid was bad, as far as racism is concerned, it's getting progressively worse in South Africa. So any legislation that is going to be approved and made into law that will protect the rights of individuals in this country must be supported. And in order to protect the rights, we believe that this bill before us is the correct decision that is being made by this court. And many of them that may want to oppose this for their own selfish reasons. But I think what they are forgetting that the purpose of this bill, which they cannot deny, is to reduce or eradicate the amount of hate speech and hate crimes that exist in the country. If you look at the statistics in South Africa, it's alarming, Chairperson, on the number of people that have died in this country as a result of crime. So I cannot understand why there is this level of fear, amongst people that now this is coming out because some political party wants to have overriding power and restriction on what they want to say. Politicians have been saying what they want to say for ages, and nobody is even stopping them from all these deceit and lies and misleading the public and things like that of that nature. For years, members of parliament and other public representative chairpersons have been using hate speech with no protection to the people that are on the receiving end. So indeed, the National Freedom Party is of the opinion that this must be supported. And I hope that it will pass today so that we could implement it. And we say again, it's as good as its implementation so that we can protect all South Africans. Like former President Nelson Mandela said, we are all one. We are a rainbow nation.
Thank you very
We
much,
are all
Honorable
the children
Member.
of one God. Let us treat them and respect them accordingly. Thank you.
The Honorable New Loken. Thank you very much, Honorable Member.
The word "we," which reflects inclusiveness, was never appeared. When we look at the social construct of our country, there was an us and an them, building a nation and promoting national unity is the historical objective of the ANC. To borrow from the words of our Honorable Minister Lamola, our Constitution is a social contract that binds all of us not to forget our past, but to create an inclusive South Africa, which at its core is non-racial and non-sexist. The Constitution is the basis upon which to undo the deep-seated racial prejudices that continue to play out in our communities. Human dignity is a central value of the objective normative value system established by the Constitution. In the Constitutional Court, in the case of Dawood versus Minister of Home Affairs, it was explained that the Constitution asserts dignity to contradict our past, in which human dignity for Black South Africans was routinely and cruelly denied. It asserts too, to inform the future, to invest in our democracy, respect with intrinsic worth of all human beings. Human dignity, therefore, informs the constitutional adjudication and interpretation at various levels. It is a value that informs many, possibly all other rights. Humanity's historical development across the world is littered with hatred of various intensity, fueling, in many instances, blood conflicts, and leaving behind a litany of injustices. It is important that we confront hatred as the root cause of many social, economic, and political challenges that humanity has been seized with for time immemorial. Racial discrimination has existed for centuries in South Africa and was extended by the support of the pre-democratic judiciary to other aspects of life. For example, in 1911, the case of Moller versus Amos School Committee, which concerned racial segregation in state schools. The white parents objected to their children attending school with Black children. At that time, there was no statute that sanctioned racial separation in the schools. But the Chief Justice, Henry de Villiers, he considered race to be a relevant consideration in judicial interpretation. He held that the prejudice in the schools is the determination. The effect of that, even without compelling legislation, was that state schools would be segregated. Although as a country, South Africa has made enormous strides, particularly in eradicating the formal inequalities and establishing successful democratic institutions. However, hate crimes have from time to time reared their ugly heads. Case in point, Yudi Simelane, a highly skilled footballer from Mpumalanga, suffered a brutal, undignified death. She was stripped naked, stabbed, assaulted, and gang raped. This despicable acts were done supposedly to cure her of her sexual orientation. During the trial, when accused by the reporters, the accused muttered, "I'm not sorry," as he was led away from the dock. Acts such as these are motivated by social bias on the identity with reference to the nation, religion, origin, sexual orientation, gender, or gender identity of the victim. And they are forms of biased motivated violence. They are the antithesis of our constitutional order. The bill is therefore critical for the realization of a united nation. While it's not a silver bullet, but the status quo cannot continue to exist. We cannot turn a blind eye to hate crimes and hate speech. This bill will allow hate crimes and hate speech to be comprehensively prosecuted. Chairperson, the ANC supports the bill.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member. The Honorable Jafta.
Thank you, Chair. The Prevention of Hate Crimes and Hate Speech Bill deals with a sensitive area of our history, implicating a number of issues, no less racism. While racism is not the only ground on which hate crime may be perpetrated, it remains the most symbolic. The bill, some argue, fails to cover sufficient ground as it replicates both the common law and the Promotion of Equality and Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act on hate speech and hate crime. These claims are not credible. While Penny Sparrow and other racists have been convicted of hate speech or crimen injuria under the common law, there is no evidence to suggest that this bill will not blunt the extent of hate crime and speech in this country, which have spiraled out of control. The shoddy work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and its recommendations have not stopped acts of hate on the basis of race. What amplifies this anomaly is that economic inequality thrives under a climate of race-sponsored systemic practices. Racists do not wish to change their cultural behavioral attitudes. This systematically becomes embedded into our national consciousness. The spirit of the bill therefore recognizes the need to give effect to our obligations in terms of the Constitution and international human rights instruments concerning racism, racial discrimination, and xenophobia. It is a progressive piece of legislation that will establish a society that is based on democratic values of social justice, human dignity, equality, and the advancement of human rights. Honorable Chair, we do not wish to enter the academic debate whether racism can be perpetrated by African majority. That debate is a digression. The equality clause in our Constitution is instructive in this regard. The nub of the issue, which is our default position, is that hate crime must be regulated and punished by law. We support the bill, Honorable Chair. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member. The Honorable Hendricks.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. Honorable Chair, when you read the bill, you think that it was drafted by a bull in a China shop. Honorable Chair, we heard from the former Pakistan Prime Minister and someone, Minister from Finland, has been charged with hate speech. So I want you to note that the next target would be the Commander-in-Chief. This bill is a threat to our political and religious freedom. The definition needs to be narrowed down, the definition of hate speech, and we need to strengthen the exemption clause. Since we understand that the crafting and implementation of the hate speech bill is necessary in a post-South Africa to protect individuals, groups, communities from insensitive racist remarks, has the drafting team done sufficient research so as not to restrict individuals, groups' freedom of expression? Our position is that it is not so, and now we depend on the NCOP and we depend on the presidency to give leadership in this regard, because if one studied this bill, there is no leadership shown. It is, many people call it an anti-Afrikaner bill. It also means that this is a blow to the reconciliation that we've been trying to achieve in South Africa. You don't need the 10-pound sledgehammer to sort out the racism. So, Honorable Chair, Al Jamaah is going to depend on the presidency, and we depend on the NCOP to give leadership and guidance in this regard. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Member. The Honorable Juan.
Voorsitter, met baie goeie rede, die wat ons vooruitgegaan het in die grondwet geskryf het tydens die eerste parlement besluit, die grondwet sal nie haatspraak op grond van ras, etnisiteit, geslag of geloof beskerm nie. Voorsitter, party sê vandag hierdie wet word genoodsaak deur die toename in haatspraak en haatmisdaad, maar statistieke hieroor bestaan nie. Die adjunkminister het stryk deur in die komitee geargumenteer dat ons boonop in terme van internasionale ooreenkomste en verdrae onder 'n verpligting is om haatspraak te kriminaliseer. Maar nie een van die verdrae waartoe ons land 'n party is, plaas so 'n verpligting op ons nie. Op die beste word van ons verwag ons met maatreëls het teen haatspraak, welke natuurlik in terme van die gemeenereg en Papuda sedert 2000 reeds op die wetboek is. Hierdie konsepwet gaan boonop veel verder as die kriminalisering van haatgemotiveerde spraak wat nie grondwetlike beskerming geniet nie, en verder selfs as die seksuele oriëntasie soos behandel in die Kwalani saak. Die terme geslagsidentiteit of uitdrukking en geslagseienskappe word in die konsepwet vervleg met die begrip seksuele oriëntasie. Terwyl ons almal moet solidariteit betoon met diegene wat soos wat in die onlangse jare al meer gebeur, op 'n wisselende of vloeibare manier as vrou of as man, of as geen geslag nie, of as 'n geslag wat nie vasgepen of beskryf kan word nie identifiseer, en hul reg om hierdie identiteit aan te pas en uit te oefen, moet beskerm. Neem dit nie weg nie, voorsitter, dat internasionaal aanvaar word dat vir 'n groep om deur strafregtelike haatspraak of haatmisdaad wetgewing beskerm te kan word, so 'n groep reeds oor 'n lang tydperk onderwerp moes gewees het aan sistemiese diskriminasie. Hierdie konsepwet sal egter enige een wat oor hierdie vloeibaarheid kritiek of selfs twyfel uitspreek, of dit nie wil akkommodeer nie, blootstel aan 'n kriminele rekord en soveel as 8 jaar tronkstraf. Die adjunkminister sal natuurlik argumenteer dat daar 'n sogenaamde objektiewe toets is om eers te bepaal of 'n slagoffer skade gely het en wat die slagoffer se waardigheid aangetast het voor skuldigbevinding. Maar emosionele of sielkundige of selfs sosiale skade is genoeg om skuldigbevinding te regverdig. Subjektiewe toestande wat bloot objektief bepaal moet word. Die toets is nie of 'n redelike persoon in dieselfde omstandighede hierdie trauma en verlies aan waardigheid sou ondervind nie. Die slagoffer se belewenis alleen is bepalend. When it comes to intent, the bill also does not exclude the obligation on all of us to foresee the possibility that a fragile individual might easily suffer emotional and even psychological trauma and harm because of something we say. In such circumstances, even the journalist that merely reports, the pastor, rabbi, or imam who merely preaches, and even the academic who merely makes unwelcome scientific findings might all find themselves having a criminal record, just because they could be deemed to have foreseen that their speech could cause emotional trauma and harm, and despite this, they proceeded to speak. The so-called partial exemption in these circumstances are make-believe and contradictory, because for as long as the test to determine harm is not completely objective, even the second leg of the test, the threshold for speech to be deemed as propagating hatred will be lowered. And the Deputy Minister, to follow in this debate, Chair, is sure to repeat his high school level debate strategy in the committee and come and say that those who oppose the bill are opposing the fight against racism and prejudice. Deputy Minister, here's the question this argument raises. Does that mean the ANC up to now has not been part of that fight? Chair, our constitution closely resembles a stance which says, except in the case of constitutionally unprotected speech, we must protect at all costs the right of someone whose views differs from us to air those views. On this score, this bill is and will remain constitutionally deficient, a blunt instrument which erodes, hollows out, and threatens freedom of expression and freedom of religion. This bill should not be supported. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member. The Honorable Masago Jela.
Thank you, Chairperson. Honorable members. Before I can even go on here, I have to start with the IFP and ACDP. Here, we are not limiting any right, but enhancing and making them clearer and empowering to our people who suffers injustice every day. And also, we are making sure that the preachers mustn't stay on the line. When you preach the gospel, stop talking things that will be very insulting to people. With that, Chair, if we were to ask first-year law student why we need to have laws. The answers are mostly likely to vary. Such answers are most likely to include the answers such as, we need laws to control social relations and conduct. To ensure that the society functions effectively and survives, it is necessary to establish norms of acceptable conduct. Although these norms are generally accepted by members of the society and are included in the legal order, social interaction will inevitably lead to dispute because of conflicting interests of individuals and groups. The law tells people what they must do or refrain from doing. Without laws, there would be no code of what is acceptable conduct. Without laws, anarchy and chaos would occur in society. While we have made great strides by enacting progressive legislation in an effort to foster social cohesion since the dawn of democracy, the damage caused by centuries of colonial rule, the entrenched division, degradation, humiliation, and hate, it's still embedded in the minds of people. The consequences of apartheid, which was declared a crime against humanity, still exist. Chairperson, it still shocks us that a first-year white university student with a bright future who never lived through the apartheid period could perform a dehumanizing act of urinating on the property of a fellow Black student. Secondly, the story of Belinda Mega, the woman allegedly behind a voice note calling for blacks to be killed instead of pit bulls. That tells you that there's something wrong, Chair. A recent racial incident that sent shockwaves throughout the country of 3 white men who have been charged with crimes, including attempted murder after an alleged racist attack on 2 Black boys. The men were caught on video assaulting the teenagers who were using a swimming pool at the Marcelspoort Resort in Free State Province. The men were trying to prevent the teenagers from swimming, claiming that the pool was reserved for white people. These incidents are indicative of the deep structural harm rooted in racial discrimination. Every day we learn of hate crimes committed against women, persons living with disabilities, and members of the LGBTIQ community. We ask ourselves, what must we do, even with progressive laws and well-acclaimed constitution? As legislators, we have a role to play. The way forward must be through respect for human rights and proper accountability of all those who have committed hate crimes and hate speech. Decriminalization and racism are infectious threats, both to human dignity and to our own relationship as human beings. They weaponize contempt, they humiliate and violate human rights, fueling grievances and despair and obstructing development. There is a need to recreate ourselves as a people. We have a duty to inculcate a culture of respect for human rights and tolerance. From early childhood development level, children must have an appreciation that certain behavior is wrong and is punishable by law. The perpetuation of hate crimes and hate speech cannot go without there being consequences. In terms of the bill, the state, the South African Human Rights Commission, and the Commission of Gender Equality have a duty to promote awareness of the prohibition against hate crime and hate speech, aimed at the prevention and combating of these offenses. It will be very important for programs to be developed in order to conduct education and information campaigns to inform the public about the prohibition against hate crimes and hate speech, aimed at the prevention and combating of these offenses, training public officials on the prohibition, prevention, and combating of hate crime and hate speech, which training Training must include social context. Training will also be critical. Critical. In respect of the offense of hate speech, Chair, a prosecution may only be instituted on the authorization of the Director of Public Prosecutions having jurisdiction. Chair, re tshwantse ho tseba hore mantswe ha se monwana, ha wa kgutli. Whatever you say, it goes deeper and it causes damage that stays there forever, more so to the little ones. Asidlali, we are serious. We want to see non-racial, non-sexist, united and prosperous South Africa, and will not rest until we attain it. The ANC support the bill.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. The Honourable the Deputy Minister.
Thanks, Honourable House Chair, and thanks to all the members who participated in this debate. It's interesting seeing which parties are in support of the bill and which are not, but I'll get onto that later. Just to start with the Honourable Majosi from the IFP, who was concerned about weaponizing of the and abuse of the bill. And look, I welcome the IFP's support for the bill, and we can engage further in the NCOP.
Sorry, Honourable Member. Madam Ashiko. Butle. Butle, Madam Ashiko. We can continue.
Okay, thanks. Just to the Honourable Majosi, who was concerned about the bill being weaponized and leading to abuse and used to silence political opponents. The bill does have political affiliation or conviction as a characteristic for a hate crime. And that's partially there because we know in KwaZulu-Natal that people were killed because of their political conviction or their political affiliation. So that needs to be a hate crime. But that issue of political affiliation or conviction is not a ground for hate speech. It's going to be the courts that are going to, first of all, the National Director of Public Prosecutions will be the person who decides whether there's going to be a prosecution. And secondly, it's the courts who are going to adjudicate on this bill. The issue of hate speech is following the Kwelane judgment. It's communicating things that are intended to be harmful or incite harm and promote or propagate hatred because of the group a person belongs to. And the grounds for hate speech are more limited than the characteristics for hate crimes. Because we didn't want to limit freedom of expression, as you've heard from other speakers, there's a higher test for hate speech for artists, the media, academics, and Honourable Swart, people preaching religious views, not the clergy, people preaching religious views, as long as these do not advocate hatred that constitutes incitement to cause harm. And Honourable Swart, you should have said while you were saying you opposed it because this was limited to the clergy, which it's not. You should tell everybody you and the DA wanted to limit harm to physical harm. So basically, it doesn't matter what names you call people. That you didn't want to be covered. Despite what the opposition parties, well, some of the opposition parties, the DA, the FF Plus, the ACDP and Al Jamaa, despite what they may be doing to score political points and creating all sorts of conspiracy theories, I want to make it very clear that the bill is not targeting any particular group of people. It applies to everyone equally, and it provides broader protection to everyone in society. The bill does not, as the DA said in a recent statement, which is not dated, but I saw Honourable Engelbrecht used it as the basis for his speech. I don't know if they wouldn't let you say your own things. No, it's in, I can show you the statement. Anyway, the bill does not, as the DA states in a recent statement, criminalize discriminatory behavior. It only criminalizes defined hate crimes and defined hate speech. And whoever is shouting, please look at your own statement. It's what Engelbrecht says, Honourable Engelbrecht spoke about earlier. We need this bill because we are seeing a growth in hatred of different groups of people, both in South Africa and internationally. The bill will allow South Africa to more effectively investigate and prosecute hate crimes. It will enable us to record hate crimes and ensure that the cases are victim-centered and the directives are issued to the police and prosecution as to how to deal with hate crimes. Honorable Engelbrecht, you said from the statement that we didn't supply stats on Papuda, but we weren't asked for stats on Papuda. The department was asked for criminal instances of hate speech. When it comes to Papuda, as others have said, it's a civil remedy, it's not sufficient. The state needs to ensure that people are punished for hate speech and not put the onus on the victim as in a civil case. And criminal injuria is not sufficient as a common law crime. It's not surprising that countries across the world have hate crimes and hate speech legislation, and it's working. And Honorable Horn, I would advise you to read the International Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, Article 4A, which requires countries to declare these issues as an offense that's punishable by law. But anyway, in the DA's statement, Honorable Engelbrecht didn't get to this point. They state that there has been no research done as to whether countries that have passed similar legislation have been able to increase convictions of such crimes, and statistics available regarding such cases in the UK suggest that legislation has not had these results. This is simply not true. According to the UK government, in the year ending March 2022, there were 155,000 hate crimes recorded by the police in England and Wales, a 26% increase on the previous year. And the issue seems to be its uncertainty as to whether the increase is a genuine rise or rather due to continued recording improvements and more victims having the confidence to report these crimes to the police. And according to the UK's Crown Prosecution Services, of the reported cases, 80% that resulted in convictions, over 80% resulted in convictions. The irony is that people opposed to this bill claim that they believe in freedom of speech, yet when they themselves are attacked by others, they're the first to claim that they've been victims of hate speech. Others appear to be concerned that they or their members or supporters may be prosecuted for racist or homophobic utterances. Certain religious institutions say the most horrific things about LGBTI persons and then hide behind their religious convictions. And I don't understand this homophobia from some religious denominations. For me, God is about love. So why do they want to say nasty things about people who are born a particular way? I was also interested to note that the F.W. de Klerk Foundation recently hosted a virtual meeting with Solidarity, AfriForum, Christian View Network, Freedom of Religion South Africa, Cause for Justice, the Institute Race Relations, and others. And they said in the minutes that in addition, the broad term sexual orientation could include pedophilia and bestiality. Now, what planet do they come from? The DA has said they oppose the bill, and it may be a combination of wanting to protect racists, homophobes, or supporting absolute free speech. In the issue of, they did not want sexual orientation to be included in the bill. They've then changed that to say, no,
thank you very much.
okay, well, I'll look
Minister.
at publishing. You don't want to hear your own speech. Honorable Chair, just one issue is on the
Thank-
order paper, the bill
Thank
is
you
down
very
as
much,
the,
Honorable Deputy
can I just
Minister.
raise the point? Point of order, I have taken it up with the table. On the order paper, the bill is down.
Honorable Deputy Minister, your time is up.
Yes, can I just raise the point of order?
No, the time is up.
You'll raise it, okay. The issue is that the bill is wrongly portrayed on the order paper.
Thank you very much. Honorable members, are there any objections to the bill being read a second time? Honorable,
House Chair,
Councilman.
the DA calls for a division.
Recording stopped.
Honorable members, division having been called, the bells will be rung
Recording in
for
progress.
5 minutes.
Recording stopped.
The bill is the prevention of hate speech. That's what's on the order paper.
Oh,
But in
yes.
fact, it's prevention and combating. You have told the tape. That's what I'd want. Sorry about that. No, it's fine. I understand.
voting procedure will be used for this division. Firstly, in order to establish a quorum, I will request the table to confirm that we have the requisite number of members physically present in the chamber and on the virtual platform to take this decision. Party whips, members present, and indicate if they vote for, abstain, or vote against the party vote may do so by informing the chair. Order. Having confirmed that we have the requisite quorum, we will now proceed. The question before the House is that the said bill be read a second time. Voting will now commence. The doors to the chamber will be locked and members will not be allowed to enter the virtual platform until voting is concluded. Whips, could you confirm the number of your members present in the chamber and on the virtual platform and indicate if they vote for or against the question? The table will assist if needs be. Are there party whips ready to record? Are the party whips ready to record the votes of their members who are present? ANC?
Thank you very much, House Chair. House Chair, the ANC is voting in full support. ANC on the virtual platform is 141, ourselves here on virtual. In the physical attendance, 49, which totals up to 204, and we vote in full support. Thank you, House Chair.
Thank you. DA?
House Chair, apha eParlamente singamashumi mahlanu. Apha ku-online singamashumi mahlanu, apha eParlamente.
Online, we are 50, and in the chamber.
It's just translation.
Sorry, we can start from the beginning.
Online platform, House Chair, singamashumi mahlanu. Apha eParlamente ngaphakathi silishumi linesixhenxe. Itotali ngamashumi asithandathu anesixhenxe. Siya objecta kulo mthetho, House Chair.
Thank you. EFF?
Thank you, House Chair. Virtually, EFF has 29 members. Physically, there's 6 of us in the House, and we vote in favor of the bill.
Thank you. IFP?
Thanks, Chairperson. We are 7 on virtual platform and 2 in the House in favor of.
Thank you. FF Plus?
Thank you, Chairperson. We are 3 members in the House and we are 5 on the virtual platform. There's a total of 8 voting against.
Thank you. ACDP?
1 online, Chair, and 2 in the House voting against. Thank you.
Sure. UDM? UDM? ATM? Good.
House Chair, I believe there's just 1 online and we vote in favor.
Sure. NFP?
Good day, Chair. 1 on virtual in support. Thank you.
Yeah. AIC? COPE? PAC?
PAC Chair 1, and we are voting in favor.
Yeah. Al Jamal?
1 in the House, we vote against.
Thank you. Honorable members, is there any member that wishes to abstain or vote differently to their party?
Honorable Chairperson,
Honorable Singh?
yeah, I'm on the virtual. Sorry, I'm not using my camera because I'm out of the country. I'm not sure about what the chief whip of the ANC said. Was it 141 and 49 or 149 and 41, which should total 190? But I heard her say 204. So I wonder if Honorable Pengu can correct that or say whether I'm wrong. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable House Whip.
I can correct that on my own.
Thank you, Chair. Other honorable members or Chief Whip would like to correct it?
Yes, I can correct that on my
Honorable
own.
Chief Whip.
Yes, thank you very much, House Chair. House Chair, we were 204, but I've since realized that other members dropped when you closed. So the correct figure is 190 in total. We were 204, but other people dropped. So I was just about to correct that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Still,
Thank you, honorable members. The voting session is now closed. Thank you very much, honorable members. The results of the division is as follows. The Ayes 237 and the Noes 79. There were no abstentions. The question is accordingly agreed to, and the secretary will read the bill a second time.
Prevention and Combating of Hate Crime and Hate Speech Bill.
Thank you very much.
Well read.
The secretary will read the fifth order.
Consideration of report of Portfolio Committee on Communications and Digital Technologies on Independent Communications Authority of South Africa Performance Management System pursuant to Section A of the ICASA Amendment Act number 13 of 2000.
The Honorable Maneli.
Thank you, Honorable House Chair, Honorable Ministers and Deputy Ministers, Honorable Members, Committee Support Staff, fellow South Africans. I'm humbled to be presenting this committee report in the month of March, a month celebrated in this country as a Human Rights Month. This should present an opportunity for us to assess a regulator like ICASA on how far people have the right of access to broadcasting services, information, communication technology, and sustainable postal services. This is only possible through a proper performance management system for the institution. Communications Authority of South Africa, ICASA, as the regulator for the broadcasting, information communication technology, ICT, and postal services is governed by the ICASA Act, Act 13 of 2000. This report, therefore, of the committee is pursuant to Section 6, capital letter A of the ICASA Act, which is about the performance management system. Honorable members, Section 6, capital letter A, subsection 1 of the ICASA Act requires the minister, in consultation with the National Assembly, the NA, to establish a performance management system to monitor and evaluate performance of ICASA chairperson and other councillors. The Act requires the National Assembly consideration and approval to pave the way for the implementation of the system. The National Assembly approved the ICASA performance management system in 2012, which expired in 2014 without being fully implemented owing to